And now, viewers, the dramatic seizure of a Venezuela-linked oil tanker by the U.S. has triggered a strong diplomatic backlash from Russia, sharply escalating tensions over maritime law, sanctions and global energy flows. After a more than a 2-week-long pursuit across the Atlantic, U.S. forces seized a tanker Marinera, formerly known as Bella 1, which was sailing under Russian flag and carrying Venezuelan-linked crude. Now, the operation was conducted by the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. military. It took place near Iceland and is being described as one of the most sensitive maritime seizures in recent years. Russia has now formally condemned the move, calling it a violation of international maritime law. In a statement, Moscow cited the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of Sea, stressing that the freedom of navigation applies on the high seas and that no state has a right to use force against vessels which are legally registered under another country's jurisdiction. In fact, the Russian Foreign Ministry also said that the contact with the tanker was lost after U.S. naval forces boarded it, raising concerns in Moscow. Now, U.S. officials maintain that the tanker violated American sanctions imposed on Venezuela and insist that the seizure is in fact part of Trump's intensified pressure campaign to block Venezuelan oil exports worldwide. Washington has also warned that its maritime blockade of the sanctioned Venezuelan oil applies anywhere in the world. Now, viewers, the operation was further complicated by the presence of Russian naval assets, including a submarine, in the general vicinity during the seizure, though U.S. officials say there was no direct confrontation between American and Russian forces. But the latest incident comes just days after U.S. Special Forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in Caracas. And as Washington steps up now efforts to divert Venezuelan oil away from China and towards the U.S. market, Caracas has accused the U.S. of attempting to seize its natural resources, while Moscow warns that Washington's actions are setting a dangerous precedent on the high seas. So, viewers, with the oil tankers being seized, sanctions enforced far beyond U.S. waters and major powers now openly clashing over maritime law, the standoff over Venezuelan oil is fast evolving into a global geopolitical flashpoint.
Maritime tracking software shows the location of a Venezuela-linked oil tanker that the U.S. government on Wednesday said it had seized after a weeks-long pursuit through the Atlantic Ocean. The Russian-flagged tanker, originally known as the Bella 1, slipped through a U.S. maritime blockade of vessels moving out of Venezuela and rebuffed an early U.S. Coast Guard attempt to board it. In a post on X, the U.S. military's European command said the Trump administration had seized the vessel for violating U.S. sanctions. This appeared to be the first time in recent memory that the U.S. military has nabbed a Russian-flagged vessel. U.S. officials said that Russian military vessels were in the general vicinity of the operation, including a Russian submarine. It was unclear how close the vessels were to the operation, which took place close to Iceland. Russian state media quoted the country's foreign ministry that the tanker was in international waters and acting according to international maritime law. It has called on Western countries to respect the vessel's right to freedom of navigation. The U.S. Coast Guard first attempted to intercept the vessel last month, but it refused to be boarded. Since then, it has registered under a Russian flag. The tanker, now known as the Marinera, is the latest tanker targeted by the U.S. Coast Guard since the start of U.S. President Donald Trump's pressure campaign against Venezuela.